Hey Braille students, let's talk about how to make some basic shapes in Nemeth, by which I mean arrows and some of their friends. All of the shapes in this mini lesson are going to use the shape indicator. The shape indicator, like all other Braille indicators, doesn't have its own meaning in print. It just tells you how to interpret whatever comes after it and gives you the heads up that you're going to interpret that thing as a shape. The shape indicator is dots 1, 2, 4, 6. That's the same as an ED contraction in UEB. And you've already seen this probably a couple times in indicators for things like the parallel symbol or the perpendicular symbol in geometry. We're going to use it to make all of our common arrows. In our common arrows, the length of bars and barbs can technically be changed, but generally we use 2 for the tail as our easy default. To make a right pointing arrow, we start with the shape indicator, put 2 tails, which are dots 2, 5, and then the letter O, which is the same shape in Braille as that right pointing head of an arrow. To make a left pointing arrow, we still start with our shape indicator. That doesn't move because the reader needs to see it first to know a shape is coming. Then we use our OW contraction, or an arrow literally pointing to the left, and then we put the 2 tails after it. You'll notice if you look at those last 3 cells in the left pointing arrow, that it looks tactily like a left pointing arrow. So as you read it, it's a shape that's pointing that way with a tail. We can also make a double-ended arrow or a line with arrows on both ends, taking that line out to infinity by putting the 2 ends onto our 2 center pieces. We do have a special shorthand as well for right pointing arrows only, when that right pointing arrow would be read as yields, like this chemistry equation yields this other chemistry compound, or other sorts of, math, yields math, where it's an equal sign, where we just don't put any of the tail. So it's just shape indicator O, and that just means it's that right arrow, but it's quick and easy to write and quick and easy to read. You can make an arrow point up or down using kind of that form of directly above or directly below that we have in other math equations. Put that symbol inside the arrow symbol after the shape indicator but before the arrow to build an arrow that points directly up or an arrow that points directly down. Those up and down modifiers can be used in other ways as well, like to modify an equation where the arrow is above the letters or underneath the letters. We'll get into that more later using the dot 5 baseline indicator and then the modifier to draw arrows inside other shapes. So we're going to use arrows again a little bit more, but get the handle right now on the basic shape of an arrow. You can also bold them by putting a dot 4, 5, 6 after the shape indicator inside whatever part or parts of the arrow need to be bolded. This is really common in chemistry for electron spin and some other things. It's the sort of thing that a TVI would generally look up when they need it or recognize it in context because you can see the print arrows and you can see the Braille arrows on the student's Braille copy of the textbook and put together that, oh yeah, when that dot 4, 5, 6 is in there, I see that's happening all of the times it's bolded on my page. I can just infer that's how you bold it. Because Nemeth follows logical patterns. It's not too tricky to infer what means what when you have both the print and Braille copy handy, like you would in a Brailled chemistry textbook that you also had a print copy of the book, or the classroom also has a print copy of the book around. When you're using arrow signs, remember to treat them like signs of comparison. That means put a space on each side of them. Remember that an adjacent alphabetic variable won't need an English letter indicator because it's placed next to a sign of comparison, those sorts of things. As a quick summary, here are your basic left arrow, right arrow, double-ended line, up arrow, down arrow, a dual up and down arrow. And notice that when you have an up and down arrow that's dual where it's one symbol, You need that baseline indicator in between them to move you along left to right and not end up with something stacked. A dual pointed arrow that's up and down, which is formed with the same formation as an up arrow. And then something like P onto Q, where you can see that the letters do not need that English letter indicator, or the shorthand form in the case of yields, where P yields Q, where you don't need to put the bar in the middle. Of course, there are many other formations. You can have a single-sided barb instead of an actual arrow. You can have double lines for the stem instead of single lines. You can have stems of different length, but they all generally work like this. So if you have this set down, you'll probably be able to adapt to the variations pretty smoothly. There are other things made on the shape indicator. For example, a shape indicator is always used before the angle symbol in math, and this is why we have a shorthand for the right arrow but not for the left arrow, because the shorthand formation for left arrow is used for something else. It's used for that angle indicator. I have the example here of angle VTW. Remember that spacing, so notice that that still applies. The measure of angle VTW, where the M goes right in front of the angle to say that it's the measure of the angle. Note that in the Braille that also the M goes right in front of the angle symbol. When you have an addition problem, angle A plus angle B, then you have that same spacing pattern where the angle and then the A after it, but the plus sign is unspaced. So the plus sign is unspaced from the A and the plus sign is unspaced from the angle symbol for B, but then you still have the space by B. So that, notice that spacing pattern. Angle A equals angle B, then you've got the spaces all the way through. For the purpose of numeric indicators, you do need a numeric indicator ahead of a number that follows a space, and because the angle indicator has a space between it and whatever it applies to, that means you also need an numeric indicator after the angle indicator if the measure of the angle or if the angle is numbered follows. So you have a couple of examples of that to get started with now. The shape indicator can be used for other shapes as well. The shape indicator C is how we draw a circle, just a simple circle in Braille. Note that's different than a hollow dot. This is a geometry circle. Shape indicator and the number 4 is how we make a square. Shape indicator D for diamond, shape indicator R for rectangle, shape indicator T for a standard triangle, that's like a pointy side up one. And in math, you could punctuate those accordingly. You know, if a kid's worksheet, sometimes we see this in kindergarten or first grade, said the squares, diamonds, and circles, and instead of writing out the word, it just put a square, a diamond, and a circle, and then the apostrophe S. You would Braille that in Nemeth using the shape indicators, and then you'd need a punctuation indicator before that apostrophe, because otherwise it would say something else. So there's just a couple of examples of other ways shapes can work in the Nemeth code. This week you're focusing on the arrows portion of that, and the rest will come in later. I just think it's helpful for context if you're aware that that shape indicator is used in a consistent way in a bigger picture than just the arrows you're doing this week. Until I see you again, happy Brailing!